So our schedule for today, from now until about 2:30, maybe 2:45, I'm going to give an overview of the report with some reminders and best practices, and then Mandy's going to jump on for just a few moments to talk about registered borrowers numbers for a few minutes, and then at 2:30, 2:45-ish, I'll open it up for questions from all of you. During that time, you can either unmute to ask questions or post questions in the chat. You'll see there are a lot of STLS consultants on the call. We're all here to work together to answer your questions as they come in. If you don't have a list of questions right away, that's okay. You can just use this time to work on your report and ask questions as they come up. At 3 o'clock, we'll take a quick stretch break led by Katura, and she'll also do a raffle drawing. So by being here, you're all already entered into the raffle, and she'll do a drawing around 3 o'clock. And then at about 3:10, we'll return to an open forum for more questions and working on the report until this session ends at 4 p.m. The annual report should please be submitted through the annual report portal by 5 p.m. on Friday, March 5th. For those of you that have done this before, you'll notice that this year we have an extra 2 weeks to submit the reports to STLS for review, which is pretty awesome. Typically they're due on Valentine's Day, so this year you don't have to be my Valentine, you can be someone else's Valentine. Before submitting, you must complete all sections and questions, including the suggested improvement section, which is all the way at the end of the report. And you should also review edit checks and hit save, of course, before submitting. The annual report lives in the annual report portal, which is called Collect Connect. The link to access the portal is on the screen in this slide, and I can also post it in the chat after I get through my slides, or if anybody who's a consultant on the call would like to drop the link to the portal in the chat, that would be great. The portal is accessible via all major internet browsers and on both Apple computers and PCs. Please note, though, that only one user should be logged into a library's report at one time, so try not to have multiple individuals logged into your report, or if you're someone who prepares multiple reports for many libraries, only log into one report at a time to avoid data loss. STLS does a lot of work for you, and we provide much of the data that you might need for your report. So we pull circulation statistics and other data, and all of those numbers can be found on the STLS website, again via the link on the screen, which I'll drop in the chat later. Just to give you a bit more of a look at what that data looks like. So the STLS webpage, this is a screenshot of it here. On the screen, I'm backing up. So this is just a screenshot of what the STLS webpage looks like. And then you can see that it's broken down into categories, and that's what those look like here on this next slide. So I've created a section on the STLS website that corresponds to every section of the report. For section 1, you would just click that little plus button, and it will open a drop-down menu with tips and tricks for completing section 1. If we went to section 2, that's a place where STLS provides data on holdings and additions to your collections. So you can see that there are tabs for data for each of those, and there's a hyperlinked word. You'll see it says view the additions questions 2.26 through 2.29 spreadsheet here. If we clicked on here, it would open that spreadsheet so you could see the data for your library. So now we're gonna turn it over to Mandy for just a minute. She's gonna be the presenter, and she's going to talk about registered borrowers data.
All right, so just a reminder of what the annual report is asking for as far as resident versus non-resident borrowers. So resident borrowers are those which reside in the library's chartered service area, and anybody else that has a card and is registered at your library, but they're not in that chartered service area, they're going to be counted as a non-resident borrower. All right, so here's where we're getting the data that we're going to be talking about in a second. What it is it's pulling the city, or sometimes it's referred to as the user category 1 of a user's account. So in workflows, you can either see it under modify user or the demographics, under modify user or user registration, and then under the demographics tab, and then the city field right here. So I live in Elkland, Pennsylvania, and there's not an Elkland choice here, so we're all kind of lumped in as Pennsylvania. All right, do you guys see the STLS site now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. So the report that I'm going to be talking about real quick is found under section 3 and registered borrowers. And then, like Erica just pointed out, you can click here to see the spreadsheet itself. So Erica has added these nice notes that kind of explain what I'm going to talk about today. So if you've already read them and you kind of understand what's going on, you can just tune me out. But if you haven't had a chance to take a look at this yet, I'm going to just kind of break down what to do or what we're talking about in each of these two notes. So this spreadsheet has three separate tabs. There's the first tab, which kind of gives you all of the information as we've provided it. And then the second tab is where kind of the meat of the report is, and where you can look to make sure that our data is correct for your specific library. So you can see up here, each library has its own column. And then these rows are what I just showed you in workflows. That's where it's pulling these row data, the row data from. And you can see here, you can kind of see how we have it set up. If we look at Addison, they have a total of 2,970 users. And we're just taking this Addison line as their resident borrowers. And then we're subtracting that number from their total user to get their non-resident. So those people that live in Addison are counted as resident. Everybody else that has an Addison card but doesn't have an address in Addison is counted as a non-resident user. So that second tab, if you scroll down and you find your library and the different user categories on the left-hand side, if you have an area in your service area that's part of your chartered service area, but doesn't match up with your library name, then you can recalculate those numbers to make sure that they're as accurate as possible with that second tab of the spreadsheet. So in this example, we're going to pretend that Alfred Station is part of Alfred's service area, chartered service area. So in our overall kind of giving you some information, but not necessarily exactly perfect information, we would say that we're just counting the Alfred users here. But if Alfred was chartered to serve Alfred Station as well, then Melanie would want to add 92 to her resident number and then subtract that same amount from her non-resident number. And then she would get a more accurate count of exactly who's in her chartered service area as non-residents and who's not. And then let me just go back real quick. So that's that second tab. If you want to get really, really exact, we also provided this third tab. We've always had undefined user category ones, and we've always counted those as non-resident. But this year we have more because that's how online patron profiles are counted. There's not a specific field in that online registration. So they're all counted as undefined. But we know some of you are want to be exactly accurate and give the exact count for this number. So for those of you that want to be as specific as possible, we created this third tab. And this breaks down all of those undefined user category ones with whatever was either free-handed by a staff member in workflows or freehand typed by a patron registering online. Whatever they put in as their city state, that's going to show up here on the left. And let me just go back real quick to our screenshot here. So in this example, if we're pretending like Alfred and Alfred Station are all part of Alfred's chartered to serve service area, I'm going to add up these numbers, which is 8, and then I'm going to add it to that 123 that we figured out before and subtract it from the 134 non-resident. And then just to be extra safe and accurate, to data check everything, what I did here is I just added the total non-resident and the total resident, and then just made sure that it added up to this all number over here. And it did add up. So we know that all of our data is still matching up and we're good to go. So just takeaways from what we have created and what we want everybody to understand. If you want to be as accurate as possible, then you'll want to look at both tabs 2 and tabs 3 and recalculate, just do a little bit of adding and subtracting. The final total won't change. So you want to make sure that if you're adding to resident, that you're subtracting from non-resident. And if you're unsure of your chartered service area, or if you need a second brain to just look over your numbers and help you make sure that they're correct, and ask us and we'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Mandy. That was very helpful. registered borrowers data is a little bit complicated, so thanks for going through it. So for everyone else, as you're working to complete your annual report, we encourage you to try to think of it as if you're telling the story of what happened in your library in the last year. So if there was a significant change in funding or in circulation, why did that happen? And then after you understand why, include an explanation in the notes field. While it may be tempting to list COVID-19 as a reason this year for why lots of answers are different, please do not include COVID-19 under question 1.49, which asks about unusual circumstances. The state knows that all of us experienced COVID-19 related issues this year, and they are disabling some edit checks throughout the report because of that. So if numbers are wildly swinging, you may find that they're not automatically triggering an edit check like they would have in the past. And for those instances where you do need to include a note, for example, if you did a large weeding project this year, you can include a note about that. That would be a great example of a time to do so. And in the screenshot that you see on the screen, next to questions, there's the opportunity to flag the question or add the note. And when you click on the little note button, it will open a box beneath the question where you can type in your note and hit save. Another tip for using the portal that I would encourage you all to do is to turn on Show Last Year's Answers. So when you're logged into the portal, you'll see an option in the upper right corner to show last year's answers. If you click on it, it will enable the feature, and then beneath question box where you will insert your answers throughout the page that you're on, if it's able to show you the answer that was input last year, that will show up in gray underneath the box for your question that you're working on, and you can use that to compare questions that were, or responses that were entered in 2019 to the data that you're about to enter for 2020, which should help you see when there are significant increases or decreases in numbers that might require an explanation and a note. My favorite reminder is please, please, please remember to hit save. Save every page before you click next. Save even if you didn't enter new data on the page. If you just save any opportunity you get, honestly. I would hate to see you have done a lot of work on a particularly long page of the report and have that be taken away because you didn't save or for some other reason that the portal didn't want to save that information. So just make sure you hit save, and then do note that if you're entering values that will be automatically calculated on that page, it may not happen, those calculations may not happen until you hit save for the whole page. Another reminder is to please, before you submit your report, you need to complete the suggested improvement section. It is all the way at the bottom of the outline of the report. It's the last section. If you don't complete this section, the state does want you to, and they will reach out to me to ask me to contact you in a few months, and you'll have to fill it out then. So you may as well fill it out the first time when it's fresh in your mind how things have gone completing the report. There are some changes to the report for this year. So given the unanticipated operational challenges that have impacted New York libraries due to COVID-19 this past year, the state has extended their deadline for reports to be finalized to April 1st, which means that STLS was able to extend our deadline to March 5th. So that's an extra 2 weeks of time to work on reports this year. And then that gives STLS Consultants some more time to work with you all on changes that need to be made before the final reports are submitted to the state. Please do expect a minimal amount of renumbering due to questions added or reordered since the 2019 annual report. Just in case you're really familiar with how it's been in the past, there are some number changes this year. There are also updates in the instructions, and some questions have been reworded. So do take care to read thoroughly, especially the instructions that come at the beginning of certain sections. There have been some updates to that this year. There's also a new section on COVID questions, section 8A. So you'll notice that as you're filling out the report, responses to those new questions that require numerical data may be estimated or left blank for the first year. Most of the questions in section 8A about COVID are yes or no answers. Section 7 asks about minimum public standards. So compliance in 2020 is not required because of COVID, but please note you must still complete section 7. And in fact, you have to complete it twice on this year's report. The first time is asking about fiscal year 2020, so you would report data as of December 31st, 2020. And the second time is looking for what you anticipate will happen in fiscal year 2021. So you would answer those questions in the second version of Section 7 as of January 1st, 2021, and looking ahead. And they do explain that in the section headings. Hopefully that's quite clear. And reach out if you have any questions about that. As I mentioned, Section 8A is new for the fiscal year 2020 report. Questions all pertain to COVID-19. And in Section 9, which asks about your trustees, but in particular the section that addresses trustee education, you should complete one record for each person serving as a trustee as of December 31st, 2020 for trustee education specifically. The trustees will not be exactly the same as the trustees listed in the section above, which is where you're reporting all of the trustees on your board as of February 1st, 2021. So I know that's a bit confusing. You want to report trustees on your board as of February 1st, 2021. But when you address trustee education, you should respond to those questions as of December 31st, 2020. So new trustees will not be featured in the trustee education section who have come on the board as of February 1st, 2021. If you get confused about that, please reach out. So many libraries offered live virtual programs and then recordings of programs or story times during the pandemic. There have been a lot of questions about how to count that on the report. Libraries should report recordings of program content that was specifically recordings, not live, during COVID-19 in Section 8A, questions CV9 and CV10. So recorded only, never offered live programs will not be counted in Section 3, which is the section that typically addresses programming counts. Question CV9 asks, did the library create and provide recordings of program content via the internet during coronavirus? If you did, you would answer yes. If you didn't, you'll answer no. It's a yes/no question. And then CV10 asks you to report the total number of recordings of program content during COVID-19. It's an optional response, so you don't have to respond, but certainly if you did put out recorded content, report it here. This is where it counts. If presented live and a recording was posted later, the live portion will count in Section 3 as a program, but only interactions with the live component count as attendance. Interactions with a program recording do not count as attendance. Attendance is not counted for a program that is only recorded. Only the number of total recordings are counted, again, in Section 8A. If that's confusing, I certainly understand. Please feel free to reach out with questions. Lori and I have also put together an FAQ document and a programming-specific document for answering program questions in Section 3, which are on that STLS webpage that's linked to you in the chat. The next section I want to talk about is counting take and makes. I know a lot of us offered those as well, and they were quite popular, or grab and goes, you might have referred to them as, during the pandemic. So these should be counted as passive programs under question 3.22, one-on-one program sessions, with a note added to explain the probably large increase from fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2020. Going forward, the Division of Library Development recommends that data for passive or self-directed programs be counted separately for reporting purposes beginning in 2021. This will help ensure data consistency across all states in the public library survey that's across the US. So after you've done the good work of completing your report, of course, you'd like to submit it. So it might be helpful to know a little bit about that. Before you hit submit, please proofread your report just by making sure that there are no unanswered questions left behind. You've satisfied all of the red edit checks that are required, and you've reviewed any notes that you've entered to make sure that they provide enough detail. You should go beyond saying this number is correct and explain why it is actually correct and why you're adding that note. You can submit the report at any time, but note that by submitting the report, it will become locked to you, but that's no big deal. You can just reach out to me if you want to get back into your report, and I'll unlock it for you. One final reminder, question 12.42 will ask you when your board will meet to approve the report. It's okay if that date falls after the March 5th deadline. Please just enter the appropriate date when your board will meet to review the report, and make sure you submit your report to STLS by March 5th at 5 p.m. regardless of when your board meeting will happen. Doing that for us. So we're going to move on now. I'm going to open it up for questions, so feel free to unmute your microphones and ask questions, or post them in the chat, and I'll do my best to moderate and get the right STLS consultant to answer Amy Fleet asked if I will provide a copy of the slideshow in addition to the recording, and the answer is yes, I will do that. The links as well. Yes, Kay, I will provide the links as well.
I did have a question about finances on the public vote, because last year we decided not to put the referendum up to increase our budget. We did not have a vote done.
Typically I think it's question 1.45. I'll be corrected in a second, but they ask you if you held a vote in 2020, or was your funding subject to public vote? If the answer to that question, is going to definitely be no if you did not hold a vote in 2020. And it's split down our membership. So about half of our members still had their vote go forward despite the pandemic or recession, and then the other half pulled back on actually asking that request. So when it says, was your public funding subject to vote in 2020, you'd answer no to that question. However, if you might recall, then it takes you to the next question, which says, was your vote in a prior year, prior to 2020, was that subject to public vote? And the answer would be yes to that if you had a referendum up in 2019. And then you'd go on to fill out the appropriate fields. I've got actually Alfred's report up right now. Let me just double check on the numbers. Yeah, so it's question 1.46 that Candy's asking about. Was all or part of the library's funding subject to public vote during the calendar year 2020? You answer yes if you had a vote that took place in June of 2020, or your answer is no if you did not have a vote in 2020. If you answer yes, then you might recall it asks you to answer several more questions. It'll ask you what the voters approved in the previous year, what the increase was, and then also what the total levy amount was after the voters approved it. And then obviously it'll also ask you what the school district was. Yeah. So this first question that asks you that, the first question on the report that asks that question is 1.46.
Yep, and 1.46 I put no.
Yep. And then you guys didn't host a vote, right?
What was that?
Did you guys host a vote in 2020?
Not in 2020.
Okay, so 1.46, your answer is no. And then all of the following questions after that would be NA.
Mm-hmm, which I did.
Until you get to question 1.47.
Mm-hmm.
And 1.47 says, did the library receive funding from an appropriation which was approved by public vote in a prior year? And I believe you guys would answer yes in Savona because you did have a successful vote in 2019, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then it says name of municipality or district holding the vote. You'd list
that whole area down. All right.
Yep, and then you fill out those 5 questions.
And I did put a note in on 1.46 when I first did this, stating that we removed our vote due to the COVID.
Okay.
I don't know if we should put a note there or not, but I figured it better because it's changing in the answer.
Yeah, I think going back to, Erica, do you have any clarification from DLD so I know we want to be mindful of not putting COVID-related reasonings in any of our notes if we don't have to. Do you know if you have an answer on that one?
I think for this question in particular, because of the way that 1.46 and 1.47 work together, I know that the vote was canceled because of COVID, essentially, but it never went up at all. So I think you can take your no out, Candy, and just move forward as if the vote for 2020 never existed. So 1.46 will just be left blank and respond in 1.47.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and Candy, first of all, I appreciate both questions. One, just your first question about 1.46, that we got a lot of libraries that got tripped up on that last year. So I'm glad that was one of the first questions for today's workshop. And then the second part, I agree with Erica's sentiment. I don't know if DLD, State Library, or the Institute for Museum Library Services is overly concerned about why you didn't have your vote, but I think that data will be important to us locally, and we kind of already know a lot of the reasons. 90% or more of our libraries host votes every year, so the fact that only 50% of our libraries held votes this year, we kind of know the reason why, and it was COVID. So, good questions.
I should have said this earlier. The slides, when they come out at the end of today's session or early tomorrow morning, there's more information in the slides that I didn't go over because it's super detailed. But after my last slide, there's this new section called Step by Step. And I've included instructions for each section of the report that work in tandem with the STLS webpage. And on section 1, we do have some information about answering 1.46 and 1.47. So if you didn't quite get all that just now, you can refer back to the slides later as well.
Hey, Erica, while we're waiting for additional questions, could I speak to the trustee training question?
Sure.
Okay. So I just want to share, Erica did a good job of putting in her notes. For trustee training, in most years, it's specific to like roles and responsibilities or any type of content that is talked about within the trustee handbook for New York State, the library trustee handbook for New York State. For this year specifically, STLS did a lot of trainings, like system-wide membership meetings where board presidents or treasurers or trustees would participate on those calls, but they weren't really specific to trustee manual training. It was more about COVID-related matters. So we would encourage you to actually list any trustees that participated in any of those workshops or meetings this year that were hosted by STLS. And it doesn't have to be specific to like roles and responsibilities or duty of obedience or duty of care, which is normally the definition of trustee training in other years. But for us, you know, since it was a unique year, anytime a trustee participated in any of those workshops, that was essentially and specifically trustee training. So we had an agreement on the system director's call that was the interpretation that we would give our member libraries. So as you're filling out that trustee education section, Eric is correct. It's any trustee that served in 2020 and any trustee that participated in trustee training either within the system or outside the system, but also any types of workshops that they participated in hosted by STLS that were possibly COVID related.
So there's a question in the chat. If we did some training, does that count, from Linda? Linda, are you referring to trustee training? Yes. Brian, that should count, right? If they did training?
Yeah, so if it was localized training, so if it was Linda at the table with trustees and just talking through a section of the trustee handbook, that does count as training. You know, so think of it as like a book discussion, or if the trustees tried to, you know, just do through like self-exercise and self-learning, took a section of the handbook and just talked through it as a group. Maybe it was the policy development section or strategic planning section. And like that's recorded in the minutes of the meeting, then I would argue you could get credit for that. But I do think that's key. It's recorded in the minutes that you guys participated in training. And that ties back to sexual harassment prevention training. No sexual harassment prevention training it should not be considered as trustee training, just because that's a completely separate New York State mandate. But that's how we document, how some libraries document their sexual harassment prevention training for trustees is they take a 15 to 30 minute window of time before a board meeting or afterwards, and they actually go through the training exercises on the Department of Labor website, and then they let the minutes reflect that they went through that training exercise. And that's kind of how they like self-certify that they went through that training process as a body. Hey, Erica, is it okay if I just mention one more thing on since I see that we do have some treasurers on the call.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to make a mention about expenses for this year.
That sounds great. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. So for anybody that is responsible for either receipts or expenditures or capital receipts or capital expenditures, I just want to highlight, because we did have we didn't have the greatest clarification on how to answer questions 12.7, 12.19, or 12.26. And so I'm going to go through these kind of slowly for those of you that are either taking notes or actually filling out things as we speak. Question 12.7, electronic materials expenditures. That's going to be the invoice that you received from STLS back in February of 2020 for digital library contributions. So every member library contributes to the Overdrive collection. And so you get an invoice, in February, and that's where you would record that bill that you paid would be on question 12.7, electronic materials expenditures. And then obviously if you contract for any other type of electronic materials, such as databases or separate third-party electronic material vendors, that would also be recorded under 12.7. We did find that some digital library contribution invoices were being recorded on a completely different area of the annual report last year, so we just wanted to make that explicit clarification. The next thing I just wanted to share was question 12.19, telecommunications. So that is any, most of our member libraries, 30, almost 40, STLS serves as the billed entity for your internet connections. And for some of you, that's also your telephone bill. But each of you gets a quarterly invoice from STLS through delivery, and then the director hands it off to the bookkeeper or treasurer to pay that bill. Those 4 bills that you received through the year for 2020 should be recorded on question 12.19 or 1219. And those are the STLS quarterly internet invoices that you get. And then the last thing I just want to highlight this year, because there was definitely confusion on this last year. I remember answering questions for treasurers or bookkeepers. Question 12.26, contracts with public libraries and/or public library systems in New York State. You should really only record one expenditure on this line item, and that is the invoice that you received from STLS in February. So you would have received the invoice in February of 2020, and that is for ILS cost share contributions. Anyways, just wanted to make that clear. Again, I answered that question for several bookkeepers and treasurers last year, as well as directors. There was actually libraries that were just recording it in a different spot. So we just wanted to pull that out for 2020 to make certain that actually make it easier for libraries to account for it, because basically you're just taking your STLS ILS cost share, the invoice that you got, and you just put it right into that question 12.26.
For libraries that received census funds from counties, where will those go on the financial section?
But yeah, so Allegheny County Libraries, I believe, are the only libraries that receive direct aid from their county for census work, and that would be in receipts question number 11.7. The same category for any of the libraries that received outreach mini grants. So again, yeah, census funding would go into question 11.7 for Allegheny County Libraries. If any libraries are out there that receive census funding from the county that we're not aware of, that's awesome. But you probably also want to record it under question 11.7. Every library does accounting in very different ways. I would say some libraries do cash-based accounting. So when money comes in, they account for it. When money goes out, they account for it. Other libraries do accrual-based accounting, which is probably the more recommended type of accounting for probably mid to large-sized libraries. And so it just depends on how you account for either expenditures and revenues. But the question came up, if we received funding, and this happened to some of our libraries because you received your local library services aid, which should be recorded on question 11.3. So the state aid that you received to operate, all of you received checks in December from STLS, and those checks represented 90% of that aid. That should be recorded in 2020, even if for some reason the check that you received in December didn't get deposited in your account until January. every library approaches their finances different, but most libraries should be backing out their expenses. So, you know, when 2021 hits, you're still getting bills for 2020. You're still getting money that was intended to be received in 2020, but you didn't receive it until 2021. When you close out your books for the year, you should be putting that money back into 2020. So for any of those libraries that received checks in December for state aid, but weren't able to get the deposit done until after the first of the year, it still should be recorded on your 2020 annual report, and it would be recorded in line item 11.3. The other thing I just want to mention about that, because I just thought about it as I'm talking through it, you've only received 90% of that aid due to the recession and constraints on the Department of Budget. They still haven't received your remaining 10% of that aid. For most of your libraries, it's just like $100. But anyways, STLS will send that money along as soon as the state releases it. We haven't received it yet, but when it does come, we'll send it to you via delivery. That remaining 10% should also be put into your 2020 report. If for some reason the deadline passes when this report is due to STLS and you still haven't received that aid because the Department of Budget is working real slow right now, we'll cross that path when we come to it. So if for some reason it comes in within the next couple of weeks, then we know it goes in 2020. If the deadline passes, we'll figure it out. So just wanted to put that on your radar because I know we'll probably end up getting that question for a couple of libraries as well. So hopefully that helps. But state aid should be recorded on question 11.3.
Erica?
Yes.
May I just check? I know we have been working with people to make pandemic policies. It looks like that is not required to be reported on this 2020 report. Is that correct?
I think that's right because they're not due until April 1st, 2021. So I imagine if they're going to be asked about, it'll be on the fiscal year 2021 report.
Okay, great. Thank you. It looks like in section 3 under policies, it is not listed, but I just wanted to check. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Katra. Something to look forward to next year. Another question that we commonly see reported in an interesting way on annual reports is your library building square footage. There's quite an interesting range reported for that for some libraries. So if you have an opportunity this year to double check the number that you've been entering for square footage, you might find that it's kind of been entered the same over and over again from year to year and is maybe not accurate. So if you're able to double check, Brian, I don't know if that information is easy to find for folks or how we're coming to those numbers.
Anyways, yeah, so square footage, it is defined as total library square footage, not like service area square footage. So that would be for like Candy. So for you, I know the public isn't really supposed to be going upstairs. You're supposed to be grabbing collections from upstairs and bringing them down for those overflow materials, but that still gets counted in your square footage. I don't know. I'd encourage, the best practice, libraries should kind of like review that just to make sure that they're accurate, especially if they're coming off of like a building project where they did an addition or maybe just put in a new entryway or something like that. But it doesn't hurt just to grab a measuring tape and just run the distance of the library one day if you got nothing else going on. But I know that's rarely or never the case when we have nothing else going on. So.
At the same time that you're reviewing your square footage, I might encourage you to also double check the date you have entered for the year your library building was built. Sometimes those don't seem to quite match up. So just double check it this year if you think of it, make sure that it seems correct.
Could I ask a programming question? And I'm not sure if Erica or Lori would want to handle this, but say for instance that I worked at the library and we provided virtual story times that were recorded for school teachers to use. Would that count as a program? Would I count the school children class participants for that? Or does it not count because it is a recorded program?
Sorry, I forgot I put my mic up. Was that program ever offered live?
No, it was me in a room doing a story time and it was recorded on the camera. There was no live audience.
According to the definition from IMLS, which is on our website, there has to be direct programming. You have to have direct connection to the audience. Direct is the word that they use. And so therefore that would not be considered a program. It's going to be considered a recorded event, and you will record that in section 8A as a recorded event and the number, but there is no attendance at a recorded event.
Thank you. If I did that live on Facebook Live, would I be allowed to count the Facebook attendees as visitors or as participants?
Yes, indeed. And there is, and you've done it live, and those people who view it live, so you have direct connection with your audience, those people who view it live can be counted as attendance. And if you need to kind of judge whether I count them or not count them, DLD is giving guidance on using like Facebook, if they viewed it for more than a minute, count that. You can also obviously use if you've interacted with them or they reported they were there.
Okay, so if I said, what color shirt are you wearing? And one parent typed in, Emily has a yellow shirt, that would count as like an interaction, and I knew
Yes.
they were there.
Yes.
Thank you, Lori and Katura. So Candy just put a good question in the chat. 3.1 annual visits. How do we answer with libraries closing and only offering curbside service? And you'll see I've put lengthy responses in the chat and also a link where we have recorded these responses with information from the New York State Division of Library Development. But the first question would be, how should a library count hours open? So the federal definition for hours open is used, which is hours that the building is accessible to the public, regardless of staff access or other service provided. An outlet is considered physically closed when the public cannot access any library buildings or bookmobiles regardless of staff access. A building can be physically closed but still offer virtual, Wi-Fi, or curbside services outside the building. In that case, a library should not count the hours as open. The next question they provide a response to is, are lobby services considered open hours? And the answer is no, although the entry part of the building could be open, Although the entry part of the building could be open for contactless service, patrons are not able to use the facility. And that way, lobby services are considered similar to curbside. The hours that a building is accessible for lobby services should not be counted in public service hours.
The question is asking for annual visits, annual attendance.
So you should still have numbers, I think, right, for annual visits or attendance.
Usually we just estimate it based on some of the weeks that we have.
So if you look at your calendar and count the weeks that you're open, that you were actually open, and you meet the requirements defined that I just read for your building actually being open to the public, the weeks when your building met those requirements as defined by the state, and then use your estimates for only those weeks rather than all 52 weeks.
Okay.
Erica, forgive my ignorance, but is in the COVID-related questions for the annual report, is there specific questions about curbside service visits?
Let me double check. Yes. Did the library staff continue to provide services to the public during any portion of the period when the building was physically closed to the public?
But there's no numerical tally. It's just a yes or no question.
What do they consider as being services? Because we still had the phone system up and running, and we were answering questions with people left us messages, which nobody did.
Let me see if they define that further. Services to the public can include activities such as answering calls, emails, or texts with answers to information requests from the public, hosting virtual programming or recorded content, offering curbside, delivery, mail, or drop-off, or drive-through circulation of physical materials, managing IT services to ensure external Wi-Fi access, and providing other types of online and electronic services, regardless of the location of library staff when the provided services occur.
But there's no specific question that asks how many people came up. I know take and makes and grab and goes are a completely separate line of questioning, for one-on-one programming, but there's no specific field or question that asks how many visits did Savona Library receive for curbside service, meaning pick up of physical materials as part of reopening.
It seems like the only numerical value they expect for Section 8A about COVID is to report the total number of recordings of program content during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay.
Everything
So
else is yes, no.
Yes. So Candy, we'll have to reach back out to the Division of Library Development to get clarification on the number of transactions, because, and I think this is why Erica answered the question first with hours open, because DLD and IMLS, State Library Division of Library Development and Institute for Museum of Library Services and Library Services, they're taking a hard line on what constitutes actual open hours. And they're giving us a pass this year, which is the right thing to do. But they're taking a hard line in terms of the services that you offered instead of having your doors physically open and letting people in. So if you were providing in-person services, letting people in, browsing collections, using public computers in some way, checking out materials, almost like normal times with the exception of maybe limited number of people in the building, those are bona fide hours open. Any other types of services, take and makes, grab and goes, or curbside service, which is a bulk of the service that many of our libraries offered this year, those are not, that's where they draw the hard line. That is not, those are hours that cannot be counted. And also those are door counts that can't be counted towards hours open. So that's why we have to reach back out to DLD to ask where you can objectively account for the number of times somebody walked up to the back porch of the Savona Library to pick up their package of library materials. And we'll get clarification on that, and we'll email it out to everybody. But I think that's just one of the pieces that we're missing for reporting.
So here's another question for Lori. Under the summer reading program this year, we did all videos on most of our programmings and make and takes. So should I be putting in 0 for the children's programming since that's COVID video?
Unfortunately, yeah, I guess you're going to have to. So your make and takes, you can still count them. You're going to count those as, I don't think you actually, under summer reading, I don't think there's an actual one-on-one count, but at least in the general programming, it's one-on-one. So if you had 12 people come in for 3 weeks, you have 36 make and take, that's one-on-one, 36 session, 36 people. So that's been a win on our part, is making sure, because we know how many people really connected with their communities all across the state and doing this kind of program in ways that we never would have thought of before. So it's important that you are tabulating that for yourselves and for your community, and the state is giving that as an allowance as well. But you did all recording, no live during the summer at all, Candy?
No, we didn't do any live ones during the summer. I couldn't get my crew to be adventurous enough to do live. And
so,
nobody would do a Zoom meeting. Every time I put up a Zoom meeting, nobody ever came for it. Come on.
So your Zoom meeting wasn't live?
My Zoom meeting was live, but nobody came to it. It was 0.
Okay. So the one thing I can absolutely say, and this is in a pandemic or not a pandemic, you can't count a null. If you have a program and no one comes, that's not a program because no one attended. So you can give a party, but if nobody comes, it's not really a party anymore.
Right.
So that's a null. I'm sorry to say, Candy, that would have counted. If you had people come, that would have counted.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see any of the other numbers under summer reading that are going to. However, those are just your story times, right? But you had other kinds of things.
Story times, and we had crafting. I I did have 2 programs to where only one family was going to do it, so instead of Zoom, they came in and we did it outside. So that I could do those 2.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So you also used Read Squared. Did you have any participation with that? You can count your reading program and the number of people, so that's one program. Did you have some other kind of interaction during that?
Only when people came to pick up the
So let's talk about how we might make that a live interaction. So read the definition and be clear about that. You know, the real value of this whole thing is being able to compare it with everybody else. So please don't take away from when I say no, that doesn't count. Please don't take away from that what that means is what you did was not valuable, because that's not true. What you did in your community was truly valuable. This is an artificial way of looking and tallying just a little snapshot of what's happening in your community, in your library, and on other libraries. So we're trying to support DLD and IMLS and understanding the parameters of their definition, but please, please, please don't take away when I say, no, that doesn't count, as a negative of what you did. So you do need to stand up and shout, because you could have done absolutely nothing, and that's not what you did. You tried a lot, and every one of you did that. It's just a little frustrating that we can't pass that pride in what we did up the chain to this date, because they have these definitions and parameters. So your reading program, did you have any other kind of interaction? Because certainly using Read Squared means you offered a reading encouragement program, and I think that's the question there. Did you offer a reading program? Yes. Do you have participation in that?
I was in children's program sessions, summer 2020. Because I did put in that we did have a reading program and how many people registered for it.
Okay, so everyone that attended signed up through Read Squared, that's a registration.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets you that number, those numbers there. Everyone who signed up is a registration. Registration for summer is defined by the state as any kind of paper and or official document that people sign up on. So in non-COVID times, people might use an AccuCut die, and you write your name on it and post it on the wall. That's an official library document. They can't get that AccuCut die at the 7-Eleven or any place else in town. They can only get it at your library. So that's an official document.
We did have some that filled out. We did have an application, a physical application, and then we had Read Squared, and I had mainly half and half between the 2 of them.
So you had some paper trails as well as electronic. Make sure you count both as registrations. You know, add those total numbers together for registration.
Yeah, I've counted all of the people who did. It's just the program sessions.
Yeah, you're just not going to have those if they were all recorded. Katura asked a question, I think.
Putting the AccuCut die on the board as a
No,
register.
it's an example of a registration type of thing for summer reading.
Right, it's
again,
not a program session.
Yeah, it's a registration example.
Lori, I know many of our libraries did story walks. Is there a place that they are able to be counted?
Yeah,
Story walks are also considered a passive program. And so according to what I am gathering from the state, they want you to put those into one-on-ones. Is that not also true, Erica? Did they not include story walks in that definition of adding
I have to look it up, Lori.
yeah.
Would
I
that
just thought
also
you,
include, would
I
that
thought
also
she'd be
include
faster. Also include what?
the what are the stuff they painted on the sidewalks, the obstacle courses that some of the libraries did outside?
That could also be considered that. I think the bigger problem with the obstacle courses and the passive program or the story walk is they often occurred. It's not like there's not a built-in way of figuring out how many people participated might have used that.
Should we put a note, because the programming sessions are going to be so much lower than it was last year. Should we put in a note on the summer road programming, why it went down? Because we changed the way we did our programming for this due to circumstances.
Or you can say you offered your programming in a recorded format, therefore they're recorded in C.
Okay.
In section C8.
I have a financial question. I haven't really gotten to it. This is Linda Dundee.
Hi, Linda.
You know, we've got all these 3 projects going right now for the building project. Do we report on all 3 of them or only on 2 of them or what?
Yeah, great question, Linda. I like that one. Since I don't have your report up and because my internet connection is slightly slow, so it might take me a while to get it up. Can you recall if you guys are reporting the funds you received for construction aid under capital funds or operational funds? Because that'll help me start to answer the question. So did you, when you guys
Amy,
got the,
do you remember? Amy might remember. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, I'm going to try to bring up your report too in just a second.
But I'm just thinking, because we've got 3 projects going.
Yeah, so aside from whether you account for it under the capital fund portion of the report or the operational funds portion of the report, the easy answer is whatever you took in 2020 and whatever you expended in 2020 does get reported.
So we're going to have way more expended than what we took in.
Yeah, so like, because you guys.
Oh, that's going to be good.
Well, I'm trying to think. Linda, what phase you guys? Yeah, you guys got a lot of phases. What phase did you just receive money for this year? Like, what check did you get back in November? Was it a big one?
We haven't gotten the final check on phase 1. We got the big check for phase 2. We haven't got the 10% for phase 2 yet, and we haven't gotten anything for phase 3.
Right. Okay. So phase 1 you would have received in 2019. So obviously you're not recording that in 2020. The check that you received this past November from the state, it was released later than usual because of the pandemic and recession. That would be definitely recorded. Yeah, and then yes, you're going to have a lot more expenditures because really you expended both phase 1, 2, and 3 all in 2020, but you really only received funding for phase 2.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that going to require some kind of a note?
Oh, because you think it might, well, again, it goes down, again, I'm trying to load it and it's taking forever, sorry. And I can follow up with you after the workshop, Linda, so I make sure we get it right. So yeah, if you're recording under operational expenses, it will look like you guys had a big deficit this year, but we know that's not true. But if you're reporting under capital funds, that deficit won't show up as part of your operational account. So.
Simple question on programming. I did 2 Zoom programs. One was teaching seniors how to use Zoom, and the other was a senior scam. I only had one person in both of them. How should that be counted? As a one-on-one, or should it be counted as it was open to anybody?
That was a great question, Candy. Lori, are you out there?
I am. I'm just getting all my buttons and everything working. Once I mute myself, I have to find everything again. Candy, I think you could do it either way. The one-on-ones are usually maybe not advertised, and you did some work in advertising. I think I would count them as a program myself, but there's no reason you can't. If you have one person who shows up, it meets the definition of direct interaction.
Lori, how would you feel about those counting as digital literacy programs?
You could do that as well. So you could count them actually twice then. So you could count them in the general programming of part 3, whose numbers are not in front of me, but in those general numbers of part 3. And then the subsequent numbers down below, where it's summer learning, early literacy, digital, you could also then count them as a one-on-one, or excuse me, a program with a one-person attendant. There's no reason why that doesn't count.
I thanks, Erica, and first and foremost, just thanks to all of our STLS consultants that'll be working with all of you as member librarians over the next several weeks to make this happen. And obviously, thank you to all of you as member librarians who make this equally happen for us. It is an important process. I think that's something that I've mentioned in previous years, and then also this year, most notably, just because of COVID-19 and trying to document what took place over the last 12 months. I think that's important because this data is a permanent record for the state and for the federal government. So having that information available is always important. The one thing I just want to share with all of you is just do the best that you can with this report. We do try to make certain it is accurate as possible. That's why we try to do a lot of the heavy lifting up front so that the data is available for you and you don't have to go looking for it, just because we want to make sure that not only is the data apples to apples when we compare member libraries and the work that they do throughout the year, but also it's apples to apples when we compare libraries, across systems across New York State. So when it comes to the COVID-related questions, I'm glad Candy brought up the question of how do we count curbside service? And obviously we don't have an answer for you today. And just reaching out to system directors, they didn't actually have that answer either. But Erica and everybody on team has been working proactively to make sure we had answers for those questions for you, or at least really good interpretations going into today's meeting. So knowing that there are so many questions out there about COVID-related questions and getting those interpretations, just the fact that we just had one I think is fantastic. So we'll get you a further interpretation on how you count curbside services, but I think Lori and Erica did a good job of interpreting the rest of the questions. So, but again, just like we've always said, just do the best that you can with the report. And then most importantly, just pull from us as much as possible. That's why we're here as your public library system, to help you through this process. We just want to make certain that, when all said and done, that it's not the most fun thing to do, but it's certainly something that's important. So we just are trying to make it as easy as possible for all of you. And then, also just use it as an opportunity to reflect. It's always good to take time and look back at your accomplishments over the last 12 months, even if we are going through a global pandemic and, experiencing probably one of the toughest years all of us as humans have experienced in a very long time. So, but use it as an opportunity to reflect as just how you connected with your community and did your very best to make life a little bit easier for those who you are charged to serve. So just thank everybody for being on the call. We really appreciate it. And again, if you don't have any more questions here for the rest of the day, definitely pull from us coming off of the call today. Thank you, everyone.